Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. I am going to present to you a summary of the cartography of Noli and speak about the accessibility. Noli's map of Rome, created by Giambattista Noli in 1748, has always fascinated architects' generation and more broadly lovers of cities and city maps. Rome is the ultimate representation of the ancient city, a compact mass condensing 27 centuries of history. It remains most relevant in spite of the various changes and extensions of the city. It should be noted that today's printing It should be noted that today's printings considerably reduce the size of La Pianta di Roma, and that some important details disappear in favor of accentuating the contrast between black and white. Here's the original scale. It seems relevant to deepen our investigation of the original map by focusing in particular on the condition of accessibility. As you see, the white represents public spaces as well as private spaces. The accuracy of Noli survey also applies to the undeveloped areas that are an integral part of the city. A certain numbers of details can yet be found when studying the map more closely. For example, the richness of the landscape elements. First of all, I would like to remind you that Noli's sponsor, Pope Benedict XIV, had already shown a taste for cartography by donating to the Capitoline Museum a marble representation of the ancient city produced at the time of Emperor Septimius Severus. Noli knew these fragments and their precisions. As former urbists seen before in the 1960s, the horizontal cross-sectional drawing was generalized to every representation of the urban fabric. The famous morphological and typological stream research was initiated in particular by Saverio Muratori in 1963 for Venice, Genoa, and Rome. Muratori, based on Noli's black and white system, made a survey of Rome urban ground floors, unveiling the structure which offers a new representation of the eternal city. The post-Nolist also simplified the representation of the city through games of blacks and white and removing all shades of gray. This post-Nolist didn't take into account to what extent the car was occupying public space. Venturi's team, in learning from Las Vegas, showed with the same inversion tools the place taken by the mighty car, both in the occupation of the premises and the perception of the signs. During the 20th century, many other authors, architects, and city planners in particular interpreted and sometimes over-interpreted this iconic map. They developed urban and architectural doctrines which brought into opposition the more classic city of public space against the contemporary environment made of a collection of isolated projects. Later, the 12 architects invited to participate in Roma Interrota were assigned one of the 12 large-scale plates of Nolly's map, including areas occupied by landscape or punctuated by archaeological traces. This map remains highly inspiring for reflecting on a representation on the contemporary urban ground floor in terms of urban functions on the one hand and of the contrast between public and private space on the other hand. In 2013, Carlo Travaglini and Katie Lelon in Roma nel Settecento, using shades of gray to show the different elements. As we can see on this picture, raise the question of the degree of accessibility of each plot. Nolly's map and its indices covering 1,320 places of interest, as well as the interactive map made available by the University of Oregon, makes it possible to study the juxtaposition of different functions within a single complex. On this map, we can identify ordinary architecture in gray hatching and civil and religious complexes in color. It's okay. So looking at the good scale knowledge map, again, I come back to this picture. 4 items appeared in terms of accessibility. First, the plot boundaries, which seem to outline some places within the larger blocks, highlights the types of access from the street. Secondly, the palace stairs are indicated, therefore making it clear that the piano nobile, the reception floor, is in fact in an elevated urban ground floor. Thirdly, Nolly chose to indicate in white the ground floors of churches and antiques monuments, which seems useful to facilitate the accessibility of incoming visitors. Finally, the inner courtyards of palace and convents were private and guarded areas with restricted accessibility. And then, on this slide, we can see diagrams illustrating the alleged degrees of accessibility according to the functions of room with the religious complex. On left, you see how they are represented by Nolly. In the middle, how they really work with many various functions. And on right, the real accessibility and fencing should be presented. In fact, in the big complex, you have some entries, and fencing is inside between, for instance, for here, women convent and men convent. Now let's see some real example. Here, the Doria Pamphili Palace was built in several stages from north to south. Leaned against the Church of Santa Maria in Vialata, the original palace was built in the 16th century around an arched square courtyard. A new wing is accessible from the Piazza del Collegio with the atrium leading to the main staircase on the right and to a gallery on the left. As I said, the ground floor for the palace is on upper floor, on first floor. And so the stairs is the main indication to for the accessibility. This gallery forms a wide hallway leading to the square courtyard, accessing Del Corso. So in this complex, which is interesting, that also you can go through. Facing the entrance, the atrium opens on a larger inner courtyard garden. And the transparency is here from the atrium near the garden. In the 18th century, an addition was built up to the Piazza Venezia, going south around 3 new courtyards. And that's the end of the palace, two centuries after the first one, with their own entrance. Thus now this massive block is accessible on 4 sides, leading to spaces with various functions, including housings, restaurants, shops, and a very famous gallery. The redundancy of the facades on the 3 sides of the block makes the whole building look quite monolithic viewed from the street. Now the religious complex of Borromini, this plurality of access points and their diversity might suggest that it's a consequence of successive addition built over time. Nevertheless, the oratory of Saint Philip Neri, designed in the 17th century by Borromini, on an important block, has also many access points despite of its homogeneity. The exterior appearance is nuanced by the 2 front facades, which is extraordinary. You have 2 important facets. At the same time, doing a complex, you do the urban plan, because that's the principal facade, and Borromini creates this place with another entrance and another important facades. As you can see on this drawing, the 2 axes on either side of the vestry cross the complex for all its depth. This is the vestry for the church, and you see it's closed by doors, because it seems accessible, but in fact it's closed by a door separating the private space and the public space. In fact, the structure of the 3 courtyards defines the functional partition of this complex, and thus the multiple resulting access points. It's in one house, it works. It's an extraordinary big block, and the old entrance is allowed to go inside, and with the courtyards, the first courtyard, this one, is leading to the public, and it leads up on the oratory. Oratory, it was originally, it was a conference room at the upper of Borromini. And it was created, and there was music. So our oratorio come from this room, the oratorio in classic music. And the first on the upper floor, there is a very big library and public library. It's very important as to understand that this big complex was already open to the public. It's in partly. The second yard, a real garden, is dedicated to the congregation, and the third yard is 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 for the service for the community. So knowledge map doesn't represent holes in a block Swiss cheese, as we have seen, nor is it in a larger public space. Instead, it's an invitation to think of complexes with different paths, courtyards, passages, and to reflect on the representation of urban ground floors. So let's see how to represent some taste of representation of nowadays what we can do to represent this ground floor. The ground map is generally used as an architectural tool. We should use it more and more. The integrity of the spaces we design and the structure and uses. It must become an urban planning tool at street and block scale, and not anymore at the scale of only at the level of zoning and neighborhoods. We can integrate the three categories, passing, porous, and deep, by changing the modes of representation at eye level and indicating them through the documents of urban regulation that we design. And this is another test of representation by multiplying point of view. The importance is to reveal and make visible only places accessible to the general public. And secondly, we have to signify and the porosity and depth of the blocks in the continuity of the public space. These representations are proposition of just a taste how to represent nowadays. The complexity of urban life and ways of seeking the urban ground floor can be better rendered by multiplying and freely associating several points of view and various geometries in the using various geometries similar to the style of Asian illustration. And for ending, further in the past, before Noli, during the Renaissance period, the hybrid mode of representation appeared. These drawings were originally used as surveys to establish the plot boundaries. And they show so the mixed representation. In conclusion, it's my hope that this brief review of the past will help us stimulate our imagination to rethink a new representation of ground floor and accessibility. That's all.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for questions.
It's hard to explain that as in Rome, the complex, the big block participate to understand the accessibilities. That's because they are like fortress in exterior with the facets, and inside you can penetrate, but just with degrees of accessibility. And it's very suggesting to now for us to establish to design the new city, because there are good examples.
Sorry. Yeah. And just, I guess, really appreciate the presentation. I guess I'm thinking about who are we drawing for, and how are we conveying that information for whom.
Qui est-ce qu'on fait des dessins et comment on représente ces différences d'audience?
Ah ouais, faut. Oui. No, I'm thinking, but I think ce que Eric a présenté ce matin et déjà se rapproche de cette préoccupation.
So what you presented this morning already, I guess, utilizes this representation.
Different points of view for drawing. I think it's the best way to communicate as with political responsible and with their distance. And en France, nous avons on peut très en amont. Oui, élaborer des plans très précis dans les guides, enfin dans les guides, ce qu'on appelle dans les comment dire, les documents juridiques de la ville.
So official planning documents are extremely precise in France in terms of that drawing detail. But I guess your question is, yeah, how does the representation of a ground floor lend itself to representing different people's accessibility or interests, or
different
who is,
publics.
or different publics?
Yeah, or who is utilizing these tools?
Yeah.
Who is receiving them?
Tout ce qui les fait.
Qui sont ces documents?
Oui, vas-y.
I think what's important to get back to knowledge because it's very well known and a lot of pseudo interpretation and misinterpretation explain on this. And it still carry on. Put the web to see developers using kind of knowledge representation. Very cheating about the accessibility. They are very confusing about public and private, and that can, from the modern nature, getting back to the references of the compact cities, uses very directly the representation of knowledge. So what we try to understand is that Nolly himself was a little bit simplified. He wants to make a kind of touristic plan
Guide.
where everything was supposed to be open to brains, but open to people and the beginning of the subtourism. And everybody understood that and still understand that. They think that is public space, augmented public spaces. And that's not, this is what Marie shows. And that in reality, at that time, they are complex, with some part accessible, some part public at that time, on some day, and so on. Some hospitality things are very close. So it's, for me, I think it's very interesting to what you said about that. And why? Because the question we have today we have to all speak about privatization, accessibility, and so we have to deal with that and to represent it in a way or another.
So many ways
It's not
that
a good. Who is doing today knowledge plan? Google. Google makes someone query. Google, they go even in the shops under the fourth floor, and if you pay, you are on a new knowledge plan of the city. So I think it's much more acute and contemporary. It seems to be a little bit coming from the Renaissance. So, but in fact, it's a way to question us to what again, how we can represent that. And I would see a lot of those trying to represent that without all the constraint. What is that?
I guess, yeah, what your work demonstrates, and I think what you're also communicating is that the very famous plan gave us this false sense of clarity that
Yes.
is public and private, whereas already at the
Yes.
time when it was drawn, that was far from clear, and there was a lot of interpretation of knowledge himself that went into the plan. So that's certainly with us today. Thank you very much.